Good afternoon and welcome to Indy Politics 101, or rather one-on-one. It's kind of like one-on-one, like a class, but a little experiment we're trying here over at indypolitics.org. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher. What we try to do is talk to interesting people about interesting things that affect the good folks here in the great state of Indiana. So welcome to being here. All you folks joining us on Facebook for this inaugural edition. We're not doing Facebook comments, but you can leave a comment. Let us know what you think, what works, what sucks, and we'll try to fix it for the next one, if they actually allow us to actually do a next one. Coming to you live downtown Indianapolis, the good folks here at Edge Media Studios at 13th and Pennsylvania. Take care of all your digital marketing needs, so be sure to check them out. Joining us today is Lisa Mitchell. Lisa is a people reader. Now, what the heck is a people reader? Well, why don't we ask Lisa and find out? Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Abdul.
Hey, always a pleasure to be here. So what exactly is a people reader?
Well, I am specialized in the science of body language and nonverbal communication. So I spend a lot of my time helping figure out what people's bodies are saying that maybe they're not saying with their words, and help to provide tools to people to know that they're receiving information with a clear filter. So it's kind of helping people find the truth and helping people understand what's coming at them and decode the people around them, and then also show up in the world the way they want to show up.
Well, we sort of have an old joke is, how do you know when a lawyer's lying to you? Because his lips are usually moving.
Yep.
But one thing I can promise you, I don't lie for free. So so this is an honest and truthful conversation that we're having today. And it's interesting because people mess up, why are you talking to a people reader? What the hell does that have to do with anything? Well, if you think about it, we just had something really big happen in this country yesterday. Testimony from former FBI Director James Comey. And it's interesting, as you and I were talking the other day, when you watch the director's testimony, you're not watching it the way that most people do. You know, some folks are partisans. Oh, look, this guy's a hero or he's horrible. You were actually watching it for the director's veracity.
Exactly. So I love to do political analysis of body language. I think the more truth we have, the better off we are at making informed decisions. And so what I do, I could actually watch it on mute, and sometimes I do. And I'm looking specifically for behaviors that either affirm what they're saying, that are incongruent to their words, that would maybe indicate deception, or that they're not really believing what they're saying on their own. I look at things that are particularly emotionally triggering to see, okay, why are they reacting the way they're reacting to that particular question or comment. So I'm kind of looking at what their body is telling me, and what their nonverbal is actually saying, and does it support the words? Does it work against their verbal statements? And helping to piece together, okay, what actually is the truth of the statement?
Well, tell you what, let's take a look at some of the clips that you brought for us today to take a look at what the director Comey has to say. And producer, director, super fun guy Jim, who is running the studio. Yes, we do break the third wall around here. It's kind of like House of Cards, except nobody's getting pushed in front of a subway. So what do you want Jim to start?
Right. Well, I think it's really good to just kind of get a feel for his general mannerisms and tone. If we cue it up to minute 22. I'm sorry, to the 22-minute mark. I'm new at this whole directing thing, so bear with me.
Hey, it's our first show, folks. Give us a
Jim already
bit of
taught me, and I'm breaking all the rules already. That's kind of what I do. So this is a general line of questioning where he's asking if he had any doubts, and if the president was trying to obstruct, if his actions were an attempt to obstruct. And so I was looking to see what his verbal answers were, and was his body language supporting what he was saying. So let's go ahead and just run this. And we're going to watch this for a couple of minutes, and we'll talk about what we're seeing.
12 minutes based upon the agreement we have.
Okay. Comey overall was very well composed, which you would expect.
As a former FBI director and prosecutor.
Exactly. So he knows he's being read, and he knows what cues he could be giving off. But even as such, we see some interesting things.
That Russia attempted to interfere in the 2016
So this is
elections.
where he's asking very targeted questions.
Do you have any
And you can
doubt
see he's
that the
answering
Russian
no.
government
And his
is
head
behind the
movement, his head
intrusions
nodding
in
is
the
actually
DNC and the
affirming his
BCCC
answer. So he
systems
really
and the
is
subsequent
truthfully
leaks
answering
of
no,
that
he does not
information.
believe.
No doubt.
Right. So
Do
he
you have
has
any
zero
the
doubt that
Russian
Russia
government
is
was behind
interfering.
the
And you
cyber
see this
intrusion
in
into the
whatever
state
form
voter
this
files?
question is asked, because they ask him in several different
Do you have
forms
any
and
doubt
layers.
that
And he is
officials of
very
the Russian
consistent
government
in
were fully
continually
aware
backing up
of
his
these
verbal
activities?
answer
No doubt.
with his nonverbal communication. You see it time and time again.
That no votes
Okay, so we can cut
passed
that.
in the 2000.
So that's one of the kind of basics of body language, right? So is what you're saying verbally being affirmed?
Right. Because,
or are we in conflict with ourselves?
Yeah, because one thing I do as a communications instructor over at Ivy Tech, and we talk about nonverbal communication, we remind people that 90% of all of our communication is, nonverbal. And when the verbal and the nonverbal don't match, we tend to trust the nonverbal.
Exactly. When you look at the weight of a conversation or an interaction, at bare minimum, 60% of that weight, if you will, is nonverbally informed. So
when I go to my wife and say, honey, what's wrong? And she says, nothing.
You know what's up, right? Like that nonverbal is cluing you in. And it's very similar even in really well-contained environments like a Senate hearing. Right. There's not a lot of kind of outside influence or a lot of distractions. And Comey, even being very mindful, is still showing that he's believing his own statements. So that was one area just to kind of get into the vibe. And he's very consistent throughout. There were just a couple of instances where things
didn't quite match up.
Where they didn't quite match up. Yeah. And there's actually, and it was when he was talking in kind of his opening remarks, and where I noted it was actually where he said, the FBI will be fine without me. Huh. He actually kind of did a little incongruent, like, no, they might not be, which to me says, he just saw his value within that organization. Yeah. So there was some contrast. And again, we watched this in a way that most normal people don't.
Now, was there anything that, like I said, the FBI director, James Comey, the guy's, long time, federal prosecutor, head of the FBI. So obviously when you prosecute people, like, you've done some jury consulting, you're watching people, you're watching body language, but even somebody like a Jim Comey, was there any one thing in particular just really, really just stood out when you're like, Mr. Director?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I don't even know if it was so surprising. I was surprised more that he let it show up. And Jim, if you cue it up to 34 minutes, 40 seconds, it actually happened twice in a fairly short period of time. And so we'll take a look here and watch this together. We'll see if you guys... And this is specifically around why he felt compelled to immediately note his conversations with the president that he had in private.
You've worked under presidents of both parties.
So we're gonna...
What was it about that
We'll see what flashes. Watch his face for a minute.
Led you to determine that you needed to start putting down a written record?
All right.
Combination of things.
There's one. We'll see if you catch it. We might run it back.
Subject matter and the person I was interacting with. Circumstances. First, I was alone with the President of the United States, or the President-elect, soon to be President. The subject matter, I was talking about matters that touch on the FBI's core responsibility and that relate to the President-elect
And then
personally.
Listen to his third description and then watch his face.
I was honestly concerned
There we go
that
again.
he might lie about the nature of our meeting,
Right.
and so I thought
I don't know if we can run that back just a couple seconds, Jim, and just catch that again. If you watch the corner of his mouth, he has a one-sided mouth raise, which is the universal micro-expression of contempt.
Huh.
Yes, and he establishes at the beginning of his statement when he says the nature of the person. It's almost like an auto reply that shows up on his face. He says the nature of the person involved, contempt flashes, and it happens twice at both the beginning mention of it and then the ending mention of it. So,
let's do it one more time, Jim.
Yeah, and it's quick. It's a quick flash, as micro expressions are.
You've worked under presidents of both parties.
But before he starts his answer,
what was it about that meeting that led you to determine that you needed to start
the left-sided mouth raise? Right there.
A combination of things.
Super quick. So micro expressions by nature are usually 1/25th to 1/10 of a second. But they are the true, intense
with the President of the United States,
expression of our emotion to something that we see here or are
and no matter.
I was talking about.
Let's catch a second with
touch
my
on
comment.
FBI's core responsibility and that relate to the President-elect personally, and then the nature of the person.
Nature of the person.
I
Boom.
was
Contempt
concerned
right
that
there.
You might lie about the nature of our
right there.
meeting, and so.
And the only time I really saw you can go ahead and stop the tape, Jim. Thank you. And that's really throughout this testimony. That was one of the few micro expressions that I saw Comey express.
And what that shows me that no matter how controlled, composed you are when you walk in a situation, there's still those things that we do that are just the nature of who we are that you can't get them all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And the tricky thing about microexpressions, the reason they're so powerful to know, and if you understand them, I say it's the second best thing to being able to read someone's mind. Because if you recognize, again, 1/10 to 1/25 of a second, those brief, true reflections of a person's emotional inner state, it's like if somebody whacks your knee at a doctor's appointment and your leg flies out, right? Very hard to suppress.
Yeah.
Very hard to suppress. But as adults, we fear judgment, we fear consequences. So we'll neutralize our face real quick and then put something more acceptable or less controversial on our face.
So as we get ready to come to the almost end of our conversation, we've got about 5 minutes or so left.
Yeah.
By the way, appreciate all you folks who are watching us out on Facebook in this inaugural edition of Indy Politics One-on-One, where we try to have conversations with interesting people about semi-interesting things we like. And we hope that you guys find this interesting. How does this help regular people in their regular lives, just their regular day stuff? Because obviously, as somebody who does this professionally, as an attorney, media person, we're dealing with, politicians and people are trying to conceal information all the time. But I'm somebody watching this right now online, like, okay, all right, how can I use that? What should I look for to know if people are being honest with me, or in the alternative, not being completely honest?
Right. Well, I think the biggest benefit is it gives you kind of a neutral point of reference. So it allows you to work in a science-based, fact-based manner to draw your conclusions and decisions. Now, if I were to watch this tape and I was very clearly one side of the conversation or the other, I would only pick out and note those things that supported my opinion, right? Because that's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
That's what we like to do. If you look at the science in totality and you understand that a contempt microexpression is a contempt microexpression regardless of what the question is, if you understand what that means, that helps you work on the basis of truth, instead of just maybe believing what you're being fed from one part of the conversation or the other. It lets you draw a conclusion that lets you make a decision based on fact instead of what someone wants you to buy into. And I think there's so much power in that as a consumer of political news and active parts of decisions in this country. You really owe it to yourself to make fact-based decisions and vet what's being fed to you from either side.
So how do we know what's the difference between somebody who is purposely trying to be deceitful versus somebody just having a bad day and doesn't want to be bothered?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So our bodies hate when we lie. They tell on us because they know that there's consequences. So there's actually 17 statistical physical cues of deception. And there's a pretty intensive process of human lie detection, and a lot of it is baselining people. But the biggest clue in deception of any origin is to look at how a person acts normally. So what's their baseline? Like, I went back and watched tapes of Comey when he's not under pressure, right? Just
No regular Jim Comey.
right,
Yeah.
previous statements, because you need to know how they are normally to pick out the variance.
In other words,
to
I
look
can't
for
tell
deception.
if you're sober if I've never seen you drunk.
Right.
In a manner of speaking.
Right, exactly. So you kind of have to know what's normal for that person so you can start looking for those cues and determining, and we never just look at one cue of deception, right? So incongruent head nodding could be a sign of deception. I would never just look at that and say, oh, he's lying. You have to collect additional evidence. So of those 17 statistical cues, you would need to see 3 or more present that you don't normally see in him to have an assumption of dishonesty. And then you would go about collecting additional evidence and verifying facts and all of that like you would in any other case. But
Or just be married to somebody for about 10 years, and you can probably tell when you
right,
hope.
because you have a good baseline. If you don't have a baseline after 10 years, you need to take her out to dinner more. Like, there's something going on there.
All righty.
Yeah.
Well, our guest today on our inaugural edition of Indy Politics One-on-One has been Lisa Mitchell. She is the People Reader. People want to be able to find you, follow you on Twitter, Facebook. Where can they do it?
Yeah, well, my website is powerbodylanguage.com, and that's a place you can find out more information about me. You can also follow me on Twitter. It's at Lisa Mitch in the letter L. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm always capturing things in the wild as I'm out seeing them on Instagram stories, and that's at The People Reader.
All righty. Well, Lisa Mitchell. Lisa, thank you very much for being with us on
Thanks for
this
having me,
inaugural
Abdul.
experimental show. I have no idea what's going to come of all this, but hey, it was great to start with
I
you.
am happy to be here, guest one.
And your body language shows that also as well, even though you're a little bit closed off with the hands raised there.
It's my power steeple.
Hey, there you go. And we appreciate all of you folks being with us today on the program. Like I said, it's something we're doing here at Indy Politics with our friends here at Edge Media Studios. So hopefully this works, and you'll be seeing us real soon. Thanks again for being with us, you folks. From all of us here at IndyPolitics.org, you have yourself a great day.